the boomers suck as a generation. No, it's not your imagination, okay? And I'm gonna give you all the information that you need in this video so that you can stop feeling guilty about noticing how much of a problem they are, and we can move forward together to figuring out some solutions, okay? So the 1960s, the boomers like to take a lot of credit for this decade because it's known for societal advancement, right? We had the civil rights movement, we had, there was the anti-war demonstrations, there was a lot of progress together as a society. But here's the thing, in 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, the oldest boomers were only 18. So while there were some boomers who are active in this movement, it was only a few of the oldest boomers. Most of them were too young to participate, or, I mean, a lot just weren't interested, okay? And then 4 years later was when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. And then after that, the movement died down significantly. And then we moved into a completely different era. The 70s was known as the me era. You know that saying, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times? So there's this essay by Tom Wolfe that was on the cover of New York Magazine. It's called The Me Decade and the Great Awakening. And it's all about the boomers and the 70s and how they started making everything about them. Because the 60s, people came up so much and they started having so much money that they didn't have to work so hard, right? So like people could work part-time, or they could do these different things. And like they started being able to spend more money. Some people spent it on substances and using substances. Some people were traveling around the country. Some people were buying stuff, you know, some people were trying to invest to make it big in the stock market. But whatever it was, people had things available to them that had formerly only been available to kings or like the upper class, and now they were available to the middle class, right? And so like the 70s was all about this good times creating weak men. He also talks about how a lot of the people who were like anti-war hippies or whatever ended up like having their communities infiltrated and becoming extremely religious, having these like new age religious conversions, and then going to Jerusalem to like have these different studies, and then coming back and setting up these communities here. You know, these little centers where people could go pay large sums of money to pretend that they had the same experience as somebody who had gone to study with like, you know, a monk in India or Nepal. Because boomers, they want to live like, you know, they have to live like the kings that they see. They see something on TV, they want to be able to do it too. The same time we saw the rise of the Jesus people, okay? And he talks about how a lot of your favorite burnouts, like the people you would know that had been on acid for the last decade, suddenly they found out they could be more righteous than you. They could be better than you, and that was amazing. They were going to do that. He even talks about the feminist movement and how for every one woman among the boomers who really cared about like equality and gaining rights and like women advancing as a collective, there were 9 who just wanted you to have to listen to them and their problems. Let's get into the statistics, okay? So the violent crime rate soared in the 1960s, eventually reaching a peak around 1990, and then it had a sharp decline after that. Now, here's the thing. What we know is that we typically see a peak in aggression among men between the ages of 15 and 25, because that's when testosterone starts to blossom after puberty. And then around 25, that's when it starts to like taper off, and also the frontal lobe matures. So typically we see that's when men engage in the most violence or like criminal activity. Now, the oldest boomers turned 15 in 1961, and the youngest boomers turned 25 in 1989. Boomers will point to all these things that they did as like a reason to cause the decline, like, oh, we legalized abortion, and oh, we were tough on crime. But there wasn't that level of crime in the first place until they came up into the world. There's a law professor from Fordham named John Pfaff on Twitter who posted this chart that shows that the number of people committing the violent crimes is going down, meaning like the violent crimes are committed by a fewer amount of people, and the average age of the person committing them is going up, meaning that like less and less younger people are getting into committing crimes, but a lot of the older people aren't learning their lessons and they just keep committing the crime. So the curve is flattening out. Right, boomers were also very abusive to their own children. This graph is from the International Journal of Child Maltreatment, and it shows the trends from 1992 present. The blue line is child SA, okay? The red line is physical abuse, and the green line is neglect. Now, the blue and red line were multiplied by 2 and 3 so that they would all be close to each other on the graph so that you could see how the curves between them compare. But you see, neglect is still an issue today, which is expected somewhat because poverty plays a big part in neglect and when there is a lack of community support. But physical and child SA, but from parents, both physically like declined or dramatically declined from the 90s and 2000s when like the boomers and the older Gen X were kind of phasing out of being parents. Now, the phrase keeping up with the Joneses was popularized during the opulence of the World War I era, but the boomers, they lived it, okay? They embraced that. They could not stand to see anybody else having things that they did not have, okay? So when the economic abundance started to stall in the 1970s, they were not going to let that get in the way of them having a good time. Enter the debt crisis, okay? Debt was used extraordinarily rarely prior to the boomers. Look at this total debt balance chart that shows how much debt Americans held like from the 1970s till now. Now, obviously, the current debt is not all held by boomers, and their children and grandchildren have a part in that too, but they were raised to believe that that is normal. And here's the thing too, look at the debt held between all the generations right now. Boomers hold as much or a little bit more than millennials do. But like they should be about done paying off. It's ironic because they're always like telling the millennials, if you pay off debt, you have to pay it off, talking about the student loan debt. But like they clearly don't plan on paying off all the debt that they have because it's impossible for them to pay it off. They're at the end of their life. Okay, so we see first the boomers started maxing out their credit cards. Okay, like when the economy started stalling in the 70s, 80s, that's when credit card debt first started going up. Prior to that, it was normal for Americans to save about an average of 10% of their income. So after they spent through their savings, the credit card debt started going up. But then the early 2000s, they started reaching the ceiling really of like credit card debt that they could get. So they found a new way that they could borrow money, okay? HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, and also the reverse mortgage, okay? Both ways that you can kind of use the equity in your home because they had bought cheap houses in the 90s and now they had like all this value in their house and like, what do you mean I have this value and I can't spend it? Give it to me now, okay? And this is kind of what ended up leading to the housing crisis. I know they'll tell you it's poor people. No, it's because the boomers kept like taking out every single penny from their house. But boomers were like trying to flip houses and like make all this money off of each other. And they were all getting these like real shady loans that they could barely pay and like taking out the equity from one house to buy another house to flip to buy another house. That's what happened, okay? But anyway, I could show you that in more detail in another video. So once they maxed that out, because the housing market collapsed and now it became more risky and they realized that's not a good idea, they've kind of just started going to personal loans, okay? There's a lot of unsecured personal loans from the banks, and these numbers keep going up and the unpaid numbers each year keep going up. I don't even know that a lot of young people know that's an option, that you can just go to the bank and like get a loan because you want money. My mom's encouraged me to get personal loans a few times and I'm like, but then I have to make payments. A lot of them keep up their credit knowing that like as long as they can make the payments, this is their gold mine to this extra money. But that's why they're unable to afford to retire, because they have all these debt repayments that they have to make, and they can't afford to actually pay off their debts, because as soon as they pay off one, they take on a new debt. So while the boomers frequently brag that they're the wealthiest generation, it's one big part of it is because they are the biggest generation. And also there is this big wealth gap, okay? Like the boomers who have gone to college, they have a lot more money than generations before them. But the boomers who didn't go to college actually have less money than the generation before them. This is with all like the money adjusted for 2024 dollars. So the uneducated boomers have actually amassed less wealth than the previous generations. And if you look at how much each generation has saved for retirement, the boomers and Gen X are about the same, but the millennials are not that far behind them for the boomers to be about to retire, okay? That first section is nothing saved at all. The second section might as well be part of it too, because it's less than $10,000 saved, okay? So those are the fakers. Those are the people who want to be able to say, yeah, I'm saving for my retirement, but they don't even have one full year's worth saved. And they're like 5 years away from retirement. The fuck you mean you have $5,000 in your 401k, okay? So really you have to get up to that brown section at the end is only 300,000 or higher. Only 21% of boomers have more than 300,000 in their retirement accounts. And they're supposed to have like $1 million saved. Okay, and so a lot of people are like, okay, but they have pensions. They have pensions. So even if they didn't save money, they'll get a monthly check. Most boomers do not have pensions, okay? These are the boomers that have pensions. The oldest boomers, they did get pensions. There's a whole huge, my mom tried to explain to me before the boomer wars, like that there's like two groups, the old boomers and young boomers. That's why the Generation Jones are constantly getting on my videos trying to like separate themselves, because they hate the older boomers and think they had it worse, but honestly, they're the most annoying, okay? So we have all these boomers who are not getting any type of monthly payment except their Social Security. And then you say, okay, well, Social Security, how much do you get? Now, these are the maximum Social Security payments that you get. And did you know that you get different amounts if you retire at age 62, 65, or 67, okay? 30% of boomers retired, or 25% of boomers retired at 62, even though it reduced their Social Security benefit by over a third for the rest of their entire life. If they would have worked 3 more years, they would have got that much more money. But now those are the same ones who will sit and complain to you about how they're on a fixed income. But most boomers don't even get this maximum payment, okay? Because you had to be working a high income job to get this, okay? The average Social Security payment for the baby boomers is $2,000 a month. And that's with more than half of them not getting a pension check, and more than half of them not having anything saved for retirement. They fully just expect to live off their children, off government housing, off senior centers, discounts, whatever it is. The community is there to support them, except for that type of community structure doesn't actually exist, okay? They've imagined it in their mind that they're supporting all these other people, but they never were. So there is nothing in place for them. And regular insurance doesn't cover for nursing home care. Medicare doesn't cover for nursing home care. You have to be able to pay for it out of pocket. And since they're estranged from their kids and they're gonna need nursing home care, right? Medicaid, you can get nursing home care, but you have to be poor, okay? So they're gonna have to get rid of all their assets if they did happen to have any. And then that still ends up just falling on all of us. Like the Medicaid system can actually provide for all of these, and there aren't enough nursing homes even open. They think we're short probably about 3,000 nursing homes because they expect about 70% of boomers will need a nursing home at some point in their life. But because they're terrible people, nobody wants to work with them. So they think we're probably just going to have robot nurses. Now, a lot of the boomers that retired early, they'll tell you it's not their fault. Okay, they had bad health, they had to retire early. And how much of that actually was their fault? Quite a lot. Okay, here's a study that looked at the dietary habits. Because a lot of people will say, well, their parents, it was their parents because they grew up in the war times. They grew up on rations and they just never learned how to eat properly. But this study compared the dietary habits of baby boomers to their parents, okay? So their parents were the ones who actually lived through the rations in the war. The boomers were born after that, okay? And it found that the boomers ate more calories, more fat, more sodium, more cholesterol, and also they ate less vegetables, less vitamin C, and less water than the generations before them, okay? Fruit and fiber, those ones were about the same. Okay, and it's not just their diet. Their lack of physical activity is even worse. The Journal of American Medical Association found that the baby boomers are far less fit than the previous generations. More are obese. They exercise significantly less often, and more than 50% don't get any regular physical activity at all. That's up from the previous generation. Only 17% stayed at home not doing anything. Those are probably ones that actually were like kind of disabled. Like that feels like a more normal number. 52%, they're just sitting at home playing with their AI and their Facebook and watching TV now. And this lack of activity and poor diet and all these other things is leading to like worse cognitive decline. 1 in 8 boomers is projected to get Alzheimer's disease by neurology today. And the kicker is that they think all of this is happening to them, okay? They have consistently ranked as the lowest generation for happiness scores. When the Pew Research Center does like these polls of generations that they've been doing for a long time, the boomers always say they have it harder than everyone else. Their life is so bad. They don't think it's ever going to get better. They're never going to make enough money for retirement. But that's because they spend their whole life worrying about Susan, thinking that they're better than them, instead of actually trying to make their life better. And so, like, they put all their energy into these plots and schemes for how they look on Facebook instead of actually worrying about their insides. But I think that the reason that it feels like all of them actually have dementia already is because of the amount of nuclear fallout exposure that they experienced, okay? When they were children. Like, we already know, they knew at the time, they were protesting the testing that was being done. There was over 1,000 nukes that were dropped on American soil from the 40s to the 70s. Most of them, the above air tests were in the 50s, okay? They knew that it was getting into the milk. They were testing the cows. They were testing the kids. On cancer.gov, you can find the research that shows that millions of Americans suffered thyroid damage and ended up with thyroid cancer as a result of their exposure to this I-131 iodine, okay? You can also see it was primarily infants and children that were affected because it was in the milk. Okay, and that's what they were protesting at the time because they knew that it was getting into the milk. There was another study that was done a few years ago that looked at how many deaths were attributed to that. And so they looked at the excess death rates compared to the milk consumption and found that probably about 500,000 Americans died from this I-131 exposure. Now, another way that we know that the boomers had high levels of fallout exposure was that's the reason that they stopped doing the testing above ground in the first place. There was this baby tooth study that was done at the time where some doctors took hundreds of thousands of baby teeth from the children and were testing them for this other radioactive isotope. It was strontium-90. Right? And they found that babies that were born like between 1955 and 1959 had over 50 times the level of the babies that were born before 1950. We also know that congenital hypothyroidism is the leading cause of, or one of the leading causes of intellectual disability in the US. But again, you can't find specifically any studies about this and nuclear fallout. And I know they've been done. The government doesn't want you to see. Allegedly, I'm hypothesizing that. Okay, these are my feelings and don't take them as facts. And finally, because boomers are becoming estranged from their children at a higher rate than any other generation, which I don't think I need to show you the data on that. Like, that's obvious that people are cutting off their parents left and right, right? And so many of them are getting ready to go into the nursing home. They're calling this the silver tsunami, okay? And since there's nobody to pay for it and the boomers don't have any money, there's these things called filial laws, which most states do not enforce their filial laws, but 20 or 30 states have them on the books. Pennsylvania does already routinely enforce theirs, where like basically if your parent ends up in a nursing home and doesn't have any money, they can come take all your money, even if you don't talk to them anymore. Okay? And if we allow boomers to stay in charge, they are going to start using these filial laws against us because they don't give a fuck about it. They don't even make good decisions for their own lives. They can't be trusted to make decisions for their own future. They're not making any good decisions for our future, okay? They're going to do what it takes because they truly believe we have easier lives than they have and that we're supposed to be taking care of them. This is why I think in November it's really important that we unite, and especially in the local and state elections, but the federal too. We get out the boomers, okay? Because they're the ones who are going to be putting in data centers. They're the ones who are like selling us out to these corporations. Like, we have to get back control of our country. We have to take it away from foreign countries. We have to take it away from these old people who want to rob the young people. And like, we have to all put aside our red, blue, left, right, whatever differences and just come to the table with common sense and not wanting the planet to end. Okay, thank you.